And then when Ganon seizes the Sacred Realm, like they had been talking about the entire time, he says this.
The Ocarina of Time opens up the Temple of Time, where the game will skip forward 7 years into the future. There's a bit of an unnecessary cutscene where Ganon tells how this was his plan all along, blah blah blah, and then a bit more exposition.
Just as it was in Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, none of this stuff is optional to the story of Ocarina of Time. Matt wants to have his cake and eat it too, where he can ignore the story, because according to him it doesn't matter, but then when the story reaches a climax, and suddenly all of those things do gain relevance, suddenly it's this weird thing that comes out of nowhere. The truth is, it never came out of nowhere. Matt just wasn't paying attention. Like, check this one out.
But this is just one element of a much larger game, and regardless of how you feel about the visuals, it's worth considering how well the Wind Waker stands up as a Zelda game, and as a game in general. It starts out on the appropriately named Outset Island with
No, it doesn't start on Outset Island. I mean, you know full well that it doesn't. This intro explains all the supposed problems that Matt has with this story, and this is on the GameCube version, where you can't even skip the cutscenes, so you've had to deliberately edit that footage out of your recording. I can't believe people take this guy seriously when he thinks that he can make a 40-minute video claiming to have some kind of insight on The Legend of Zelda. Meanwhile, every single blasted thing he says about this story doesn't contain any information in it. Matt, not only are you missing the entire point of the whole story, you're doing it on purpose. You know what the story is. You've proven that you know.
We're told that Ganon has basically won. He's got his hands on the Triforce and took over the Sacred Realm. Link got sealed away for 7 years so he could grow old enough to take him on. From here on out, most of the game is played as adult Link in the future, and it's a great idea for the plot. In most action-adventure style games that revolve around saving the world, you're given some idyllic place that needs protection, or a post-apocalyptic world where the struggle of the people compels you to try and help them. Either of these scenarios can only be so effective because we're left wondering about what exactly it is we're trying to prevent, or what exactly it is we're trying to restore. As soon as you walk into Hyrule Town 7 years on, Ocarina of Time has answered both of these questions. You have an immediate comparison in your mind of what Hyrule should look like, and what it does look like now.
You have very good reading comprehension. Just because from Tetra's point of view all of this is mysterious, that doesn't mean the player doesn't know who Zelda is. Tetra wasn't alive 100 years ago. She obviously doesn't know who Zelda is. That doesn't mean that this moment is out of character. We, the audience, do know who Zelda is. Her name's on the title screen. The only reason you wouldn't apply this logic to the Wind Waker is if you were being deliberately disingenuous to serve your opinion.
You have an immediate comparison in your mind of what Hyrule should look like, and what it does look like now. The game doesn't even take place in Hyrule, not as we know it anyway. What Hyrule should look like. The game doesn't even take place in Hyrule, not as we know it anyway. What Hyrule should look like, and what it does look like now. Well, not as we know it anyway. And what it does look like now.
But as previously established, the moral at the end of The Wind Waker is that you should accept the past for what it is and build a better future. Twilight Princess, being an alternate ending to the story, is now inverting that moral. Now, Link is the one protecting his heritage and saving his family, and Ganondorf is the one creating a future for himself in spite of his past. The shoe's on the other foot, but interestingly, Ganondorf is still in the wrong. This is the thematic purpose behind the timeline. At this point, I really have no patience for the people who pretend like the timeline is inconsequential or confusing, because its purpose here is obvious. Twilight Princess is a poetic inversion of Wind Waker. That's the whole reason that they're both sequels to Ocarina of Time. Now you're able to explore, on an emotional level, both sides of the same coin. It's fun and interesting, and it's very sad that a lot of people just can't be bothered. But anyway, how does Eiji Aonuma pull all this off? Well, Zant is the key here. Notice that Zant doesn't have to beg Ganondorf for powers or anything. Ganondorf actually comes up to Zant. Let's think about this for 2 seconds. Why Zant? Well, Zant must be special, right? Remember how Tetra is the next Zelda after her mother? Well, here, Zant is the heir to the Lost Gerudo Patriarchy. He's the third male Gerudo after Groose. Once again, this stuff would be totally obvious if Matt simply read the text on screen. You know, thank God it's actually on screen this time. If this was really a retrospective, like it says in the title, wouldn't it contain information that Matthew would only have access to in retrospect? You know, like an art book that explains the story in black and white detail. But no, just to make sure he's been contrarian to every single point made by Hyrule Historia, since that's the true reason he made these videos, he's going to insist that Zant was always supposed to be the main villain of Twilight Princess. With no evidence, mind you. I mean, seriously? I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but you don't have to make fun of these videos. They just make fun of themselves.
It may be a case they only made this decision because they knew many players would be replaying the game and thus would be ready for hard mode, but I hope they seriously consider this for the next Zelda. At the end of the game, you're taking on multiple Darknuts at once, who do several hearts of damage if they manage to connect.
There's a concerted effort by Matt to overgeneralize and downplay everything, not just the story. He's constantly acting like he's too good for the game. And if that's how you feel about video games, that they should have to earn your attention and respect, you know, that's a matter of personal taste. You can like whatever you want. But don't delude yourself into thinking that attitude makes you superior to everyone else. Now, like I said, most fans these days already know most of this. Matthew is a huge outlier. But at the end of the day, even the fans who are aware just aren't seeing the bigger picture. So we need to keep zooming out. And there's a huge prerequisite before you can truly appreciate Twilight Princess as the first proper revision to Zelda's chronology.
Oh man. Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun playthrough. Anyone here never see this? Also, thank you for the host mic. Hi, everybody. Oh, so there's a lot of people who have never played this game. I think you'll enjoy this. This is going to be one of those playthroughs I think you might remember for a little while. Not because of me, but because of the game. It's just one of those games. So, really nice look at the world. For anyone who's getting Legend of Zelda vibes, it's a pretty damn different game, aside from just a couple of visual similarities and sword. And horse, and bridge, and castle. And bow, and climbing. Oh, and Zelda is in this. And Link. And Epona. And Ganon. Alright, I'll stop.
Fumito Ueda is intentionally pulling from Eiji Aonuma in multiple important points in both Ico and in Shadow of the Colossus. And Eiji Aonuma is intentionally pulling from Fumito Ueda in multiple important parts in Twilight Princess, in Skyward Sword, and even as early as The Wind Waker. So, no, Vinny, their similarities are not superficial. Ico was essentially a love letter to Ocarina of Time, and Shadow of the Colossus has a load of distinctly intentional references to Majora's Mask. Aonuma's referencing Ueda as a reciprocation of Ueda's own references to him. This is about two artists coming to an emotional agreement about something. The comparison currently on screen alone proves that they were not only good friends and have a strong relationship, but that they were actively bouncing ideas off of one another and making notes in each other's margins. Comparing side by side like this isn't revealing something shallow like their favorite flavor of ice cream, it's corroborating evidence of their authority in their own work. The big one that I always think of is this one, the spiral staircase inside the tower. Aonuma wants you to think about Yorda from Ico, and he wants you to compare Yorda in that game to Zelda's role in this game. a pale, fragile girl hiding in the shadows. And that's exactly why Ganondorf's first phase is fighting Zelda as a puppet. In Ico, Yuita was comparing the Queen to Ganondorf, specifically from Ocarina of Time. The Queen is Yorda's helicoptering mother, who won't let her daughter leave the house, and she's molding her daughter into becoming a younger version of herself. Yuita wants to show that love can be just as damaging as hate, if you're possessively loving and you don't let your children be their own people, or in Wander's case, if you try to cheat death by making a deal with the devil. He's also possessive with his love. Aonuma poetically agrees with these sentiments and has his parental figure in his game, The Wind Waker, be exclusively about that. Aonuma's talked about that several times, about how he made The Wind Waker for his son, and that Toon Link was meant to be an analog for his son. We're going to come back around to that later. These kinds of connections apply to the Twilight Princess too, but I'm talking about Wind Waker here because I think it's an easier and more obvious example, but really Twilight Princess is obvious too. Zelda fans are just incredibly dense. I mean, some of them have suggested, like, as a fan theory, maybe the Gerudo could have turned into the Twilight, but no, they haven't accepted that this is the intended interpretation. They haven't accepted that this is a fact. I mean, I know it's not everyone, but a lot of people, including Vinesauce, or Vinny, he's watching the pre-Lakebed Temple flashback and assumes that these interlopers are some new race of people that we've never heard of. I'm not joking, he actually takes the explanation for the series' largest retcon at face value.
I don't remember any of that stuff. Okay.
By extending the
I don't remember any of this.
They don't get that Midna's hair color is meant to be reflective of Twinrova. They don't get that Midna's dialogue before the fight reflects what Naboru tells you as a child. And they especially don't understand that Zant being a male Gerudo and wanting to reestablish the patriarchy is what all of this dialogue was always about. There is a pretty good video by Max Darrett where he talks about all the Gerudo's dark magic stuff, and how in both Zelda and in Ico, there's a focus of this dark transformation magic and body horror. But again, most of that is the bleeding edge of the fandom, and even he doesn't get into everything. But it bears repeating that none of this is a fan theory, and it's not inconsequential. It's the way that the director of both Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess intended the audience to interpret their connected story, also known as canon. It's a fact. It is not a mystery. It's not even hidden. It's required for understanding the story properly. It's ridiculous that I should even need to say that, because these games, in full reality, they're not even that dense with story. These stories are moral lessons meant for children. If you just pay basic attention, this is the only way that you could interpret it. The game is practically preaching it at you. The characters explicitly tell you all this shit in dialogue. Now, unfortunately for Yuita, most of his games, the cutscenes are written as silent movies, so you don't need dialogue to be able to follow the story. But Aonuma's games require dialogue because of his background. We are getting to that later, like I said. Don't worry, we're almost there. But you can tell, like, even down to a plot level, all these connections are important. Like, how Ganon is taking girls to the Forsaken Fortress because they have yellow hair. That's just like how Ico is taken to the Queen's Castle because he's a boy with horns. Yuita is deliberately putting you in the shoes of outcasts from cultural stigmas in his games. And, you know, those ideas of sacrifice to ward off evil are pretty essential to Shintoism. And any media-literate adult should know that Shintoism isn't important to anything created in Japan. As you can see, Ico's connections to Zelda and Zelda's connections to Ico are not optional pieces of this analysis. Even in Vinny's case, I actually don't think he meant to say that Ico and Zelda aren't connected. What he really meant was just for chat to not watch the gameplay expecting Zelda, which is a good primer.
For anyone who's getting Legend of Zelda vibes, it's a pretty damn different game, aside from just a couple of visual similarities.
But as Vinny's watching Shadow of the Colossus' intro, you can hear the moment where he recognizes the Bridge of Elden quote.
And sword. and horse and bridge and castle.
I don't know how you missed the Lostwood stuff from like 5 seconds ago, but that's not the point. It's very obvious in his tone. He just immediately ate his own words. But rather than apologize and admit there's something he could learn here, he just turned it into a joke instead.
Oh, and Zelda is in this. And Link. And Epona. And Ganon. Alright, I'll stop.
This was an opportunity. A moment where Vinny could have educated his audience on something he picked up on. Seriously. Shouldn't it matter that Vinny plays video games for a living? Like, if someone's gonna call this stuff out, shouldn't, of all people, that responsibility fall on someone like him? It's not like it's that hard to figure out. This doesn't just apply to Vinny. If you play Nintendo games for a living, and you didn't know that Zelda takes cues from the Ico series, I'm not going to say that that's okay, because I don't think it's okay. These ideas don't come from nowhere, and they're not meant to seem like they do. The only reason Nintendo fans don't know any of this stuff is because all their gaming experience exists in a bubble.
I feel like right now in the early days of Switch, that's what you're seeing, is that there's people who have the Switch and are hungry for
but
games
how many?
to play.
Well, how big is it?
The
How big is the audience?
Exactly.
What is it? 2 million units?
2 million.
yeah,
is
right,
what
'cause that's what they wanted
the
to hit
original
by.
launch
Yeah,
would have
yeah.
been.
So let's take 2 million units,
Yeah.
right? Now, do you ever sell in 10% of the installed base?
Supposedly, Switch has a crazy attach rate with the
Well,
with
that's because
Zelda
there's
and then-
so few available. One of the
Yeah.
highest IPs of all time, right? Nintendo first party will deliver IPs that the Nintendo audience is just frothing for, right? So they'll have the highest attach rate of any new console
Yeah.
with their own specific IPs, Zelda and Mario. No, really, who really by the end of the life of the Wii, who else was making money on the Wii aside from Nintendo? How many titles sold for the Wii that weren't Nintendo first party?
Sure.
Okay. So what happened? So they started basically evaporating third-party support, right? And we get to Wii U. What happened? Same.
No third parties, yeah.
So there could be some advantages for some people, but overall it's going to add up to the same thing. Smaller portfolio on the library, period. At the end of the day, the catalog is going to be this when it could have been this. You would have thought that maybe if there's no games for sale on a network, if people have a hardware device, maybe they'd like to know that a game has become available.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that, in a silly me.
Yeah.
If you grew up with Nintendo, there's a good chance you never leave Nintendo, and more crucially, there's a good chance you never actually grow up. Instead of complaining that Skyward Sword was boring, what people at the time should have said is how bold it actually is. And no, I'm not saying that out of any bias whatsoever. This is one of the key things that holds video games back from being appreciated as narrative art, because all the art intellectuals think that video games are nothing more than toys, and all the gamers are apparently only interested in the toy-like qualities of the games they play. Credit where credit is due, when Vinny streams a Zelda game, he does play it correctly, slowing down and making sure to read all the NPC dialogue like signposts.
Like a Twilight Princess. Shit, hang on.
So despite being a viewer of channels like AVGN, Narrow, or Matthew Matosis, Vinny's been immune to all the big common misconceptions, which makes him an excellent example for this section.
It goes like this. All right, there's 3 separate timelines that branch off of Ocarina of Time. So here's how it goes. I want to explain it because it's very interesting. I just learned some more little details in Hyrule Historia. So, 3 different timelines. In one of the timelines, when Ocarina ends, Link goes back to being a child. That's the ending that we see. Zelda tells the king, they find out that, Ganondorf was a cunt, and they decide to get rid of him. Many years down the road, they execute him. That's in Twilight Princess. But here's what happened to Link. Link wandered off into the forest without a fairy. And, Navi didn't get lost. Navi flies away. At the end of Ocarina of Time, Navi just flies away. And in the beginning of Majora, you see that Link is looking for a friend. And he's obviously in the woods. And it's highly speculated that say if Majora did happen, let's just say it did, if it was real, if there really was a parallel universe that Link went to and returned from, well, that Link was forever forgotten. No one knew about the Hero of Time. No one celebrated the Hero of Time in this particular timeline. Just to further add to that, in Hyrule Historia, it's directly stated that the Link, the Hero of Time, was never to be seen or heard from again after Majora's Mask. And his regret over that, as it states in Hyrule Historia, allowed him to be the swordsman whose sole purpose was to teach the new Link of Twilight Princess the moves that he knew as a way to pass down his thing, his legacy. So the hero is successful, and the adult era, Ganondorf is revived, Hyrule is sealed and flooded. Because the hero wasn't even around, I don't think. I have to read into that a little bit more. I haven't gotten to the Wind Waker section yet. I know it's a little bit to wrap your head around, but it is exceedingly interesting. So, isn't this stuff really interesting? Like, I love this stuff, the theories. And it seems like Majora was the deepest and had the most psychological stuff going on there. So, and there you go. Tingle is a representation of Link. Tingle is a mutation of Link. Because he's a 40-year-old man dressed as a fairy. Which again is representative of the...
When I watched this in 2015, I was enthralled. I had a lot of fun revisiting Zelda with Vinny's Wii U streams, and then playing them on my own. At the age of 14, I hadn't played Skyward Sword yet, and I hadn't read Hyrule Historia, but I did watch Vinesauce, and that was my introduction to all this. I'm gonna criticize a popular streamer, but know that I do so with peace and love. I really don't think that Vinny is stupid, although he can be impatient sometimes. You can see here that when he applies himself, he's actually an enormous asset to media literacy. I'm also not the first person to ever complain about his reactionary approach to really just any game outside of Zelda that tries to be story-driven. It's not irrelevant either. There's a large example that I'm going to get into soon, but first, I just want to fully concede something. Yes, this is about loyalty and authority, and I'm going to address that directly before I talk about said example. Just because fiction isn't real, that doesn't mean that it's a lie or that it doesn't mean anything. In the end, art is what you make it out to be. If you're not receptive to it, you won't understand. If you laugh at it like it's a joke, then that's all you're allowing it to be for you. That's your choice. So to understand something from the perspective of the person who created it, you do have to drink the Kool-Aid. At least a little bit. But I think this is such a sticking point for a lot of gamers, not just Vinny. They've latched on to this false idea of player autonomy and quote-unquote freedom. That feeling you get when you're perfectly immersed in an artist's world, it's not freedom, it's surrender. There's only one correct way to play a video game, and when you do, you feel free. You feel like your actions are your own. And that feeling is, in fact, important. The player has to have control over certain small actions. It's something unique to the medium of games. Only in a game are you able to fully and completely immerse the audience in the role of your protagonist. But that really isn't a goal in and of itself, it's just a means to an end. Video games are curated experiences. At no point is the player in control of what context their small actions can be applied, because if you do something unintended, we understand that to be a glitch and not part of the design. Instead, the artist is in control of the context. which is why level design is crucial. It dictates the entire grammar of how games talk to you. There's just no such thing as a linear game. Terms like gameplay first and open world are not genres. They're marketing buzzwords, and they always have been. If you're somebody who truly enjoys open world level design, I have to stress that you aren't being entertained by an artist's imagination. You're just caught up in your own. Gamers today have this assumption that storytelling is somehow foreign or isolated from gameplay. It's an assumption you can't square with reality, though. If you actually read the interviews of Eiji Aonuma, Lorne Lanning, Hideo Kojima, you learn that they were all involved in their games intimately and as a whole. There's no notion that gameplay and story are separated in their development process in any way. And more than that, it should be commonly understood that when you're an artist, you have an idea, and you design around that idea. All of your designs are influenced by your idea. Most of the effort on the part of the artist is to continually bring their designs back to their core idea. It's not really as strange or as convoluted as it's made out to be. It's just standard practice. The standards weren't always this way, of course, but for the game developers that I keep mentioning, they all got their start in game development in the PS2 era, after games went 3D, and was the moment that video games finally stopped being only for nerds. If you want to know exactly why games weren't seen as much before the 90s, Lorne Lanning was there. He can tell you why.
What was also on the horizon was Sony PlayStation. So Sony was saying, we're going to get into the game business. And that was kind of out there a couple years before the PlayStation launch, at least. And that's when I thought, this is really going to get interesting, because for the first time, we're going to have a real, true entertainment company get into the game business as a player, and not just a toy company. And that's how I saw Sega and Nintendo, was toy companies. And I don't mean that in any derogatory or condescending way. I just meant they saw their market, and they didn't believe in things like sequels. Check this out, right? So we're going around and talking to game publishers and stuff, and I'm trying to tell them how we're going to build a series, and because I'm just following, like, what does X-Files do? What did Disney do? What is the sequels? Is all Hollywood's about. In games, they were thinking, and this is in 1993, 94, 95, they're going, there's no money in sequels. The sequel only sells at best half as much as the original hit, so we don't really bank on it. And I saw that, I was like, there's one of our moments. There's one of my George Lucas, Walt Disney moments. They don't believe in sequels, which means they don't believe in brand, which means they still thinking about it like it's the toy industry. You know, you come out with Cabbage Patch Kid, but you can't milk it to death, right? Barbie lasts forever, Hot Wheels lasts forever, Legos lasted forever, but everything else tends to be largely come and go. So the toy industry thought more in this way of, you come up with a toy, if it can be a hit, you ride it, you milk that cow for all it's worth, and then you got to come up with a new one. And games was still thinking that way.
It's like I said earlier, this is the entire reason that people like this became artists and became developers. It was always what was most important to them and what they wanted to do with their lives. In all of these cases, the consistent problem isn't that they made the game too cutscene heavy or they were trying to balance everything to the satisfaction of the audience. The problem that they were actually faced with is that they couldn't tie their designs back to their ideas in the way that they wanted to, either because the hardware wouldn't support the actions or scenarios that they wanted, or because corporate overseer didn't want them to do it for an entirely arbitrary reason. As time goes on, the artist has more respect, the industry standards improves, and technology progresses to the point where they can finally execute their vision. From what the artists have been able to accomplish with their later work, you can just immediately understand that games like Abe's Odyssey, Ico, and the first Metal Gear are all extremely unfinished games, and their sequels don't fare any better. So even though we can go back now and point to these early titles as early signs of a particular artist, the studio really had more control than they did. The only thing salvageable about the game is that it partially belonged to the game's director. But even though the game has those elements, these games really don't accurately reflect the artists that truly made them. As a direct result, the audience who gained an attachment and became fans of their earliest work when they couldn't do what they wanted almost always develop mistaken impressions.
This one is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, but wait, not a sequel to the end where adult Link defeats Ganon, no, it's a sequel to young Link after he got sent back. So now, any speculation of Nintendo ever making a sequel to Zelda 2 is deader than shit.
This clip of James Rolfe is a perfect example. James wants a direct sequel to Zelda 3. He wants a story that continues in one direction. That was never going to happen, though, because before Ocarina of Time, the story of Zelda that was being told was nowhere near deep enough to actually support a continuing story. Each Zelda title basically existed in replacement of one another. They were explicitly not 3 chapters in one story, and they weren't trying to be. During development, Tezuka and Koizumi in their earliest work together kept trying to run away from continuity, not embrace it. That's not because they didn't want to tell stories, it's because they didn't want to get attached and deal with the inevitable loss when they were told no to their ideas.
They don't understand yet. It's going to be brand IP and sequels. But that means it's got to be deeper, richer universes. And in the shit you're currently delivering, I understand why you don't believe in sequels. Because that story sucked. No one gives a fuck about your story because it sucks. If it wasn't good play, your character sucks because you don't have any character development. And so I was very critical of what the characters were in games. Not that I wasn't enjoying them, but when you put it up to a Hollywood standard of character development, character arc, what's happening across the multi-act structure, you know, you had a whole different analysis of what constituted a popular character. So does Mario turn into a good movie? It's a fucking terrible movie, right? It's a terrible movie because it's not there to begin with, right? Does Ratchet and Clank make a good movie? I love Insomniac. Why would you make a movie out of Ratchet and Clank? How deep is the fabric of those characters? How many other game movies did we just give no depth that we expect from movies? So they brought to the movie the same superficiality that's in the game, except what they had the game going for it was good challenge. Now it's just a challenge to watch, right? So for me, I was like, if we build really rich characters with really rich, deep stories that aren't what you expect, so they have the ability to possibly cut through, then they might have a longer life. And as the game industry matures, then maybe they can hit the big time. Then maybe they can, you know, really have their name in lights.
What James really wants when he says that he wants a sequel to Zelda 2 is for things to go back to the way they were. He wants a sequel that doesn't try to tell an actual story. Whenever you're having a discussion about the particular merits about something with an NES fan or a Super Nintendo fan, you'll always notice how impenetrably vague they are with what they choose to focus on. This assumption that the mass exodus of the NES-era developers were just a bunch of happenstance is itself an example of the survivorship bias. The retro gamers who were there at the time, of course, are provincial when they talk about the jump to 3D, as if this was a significant technological change to the point where 2D and 3D games are entirely different types of games. The reality is, their reactions don't hinge on whether or not these things were always there, or if they were consequentially important. What these types of audiences aren't willing to admit is that they're automatically hostile to the mere concept of there being an overarching story in the first place.
I'm glad that Zelda, Ganon and Hyrule are all absent from Majora's Mask, because after Ocarina of Time, there was no need to revisit Hyrule and no story to be told there. Any direct sequel would need to be told somewhere else in order not to weaken the impact of the events in Ocarina.
That's obviously not true. So what's really going on? It turns out, when you refuse to let artists tell their own stories, and you remove the slight technological edge that you had, suddenly your intellectual property doesn't have a leg to stand on. But it could have been easily avoided if people from the 80s era of games had a reason to be interested in those series other than pure mechanical satisfaction.
There are plenty of famous actors and directors who've lent their names to movie-like games, but Oddworld's co-founders Sherry McKenna and Lorne Lanning are from a world of special effects and theme park rides. They left behind big budgets and state-of-the-art equipment because they never had full control of a project.
When you are the vendor, the client thinks that they know more than you do about what you're basically doing. So you'll have the suits come down and say, yeah, that looks great. Can you make it blue? And so basically, you know, my whole career has been spent listening to other folks tell me how to do what I'm supposed to be an expert at doing.
Lorne Lanning is an exception in the scenario, not in the fact that he's dealing with these problems, but in the fact that he's allowed to talk about them. Eiji Aonuma and Hideo Kojima would have had to keep their mouths shut, or it would have cost them their jobs.
Most of the development community, not the game buyers, but the development community said 3D is what's going to make better gameplay. Well, they're wrong. And game players today know that they're wrong because they've got 100 games on a shelf that aren't as good as many of the games they used to play in 2D. 3D is not that important right now. Eventually we'll go 3D. But right now, what's important is making better gameplay. And that's where so many people have missed it entirely.
The authority of an artist's influence on a work is considered a threat to the authority of a corporation whose only goal is to make the most amount of money by pleasing the most amount of fans possible. We very trivially know this, because it's true in every single industry.
And someone sent in that one about too many Chinese cooks spoil the broth.
What? Well, why is? Well, that's. I don't know who slipped the word Chinese in there, but I heard it as too many cooks.
Well, it was just all sort of Chinese proverbs and that.
One of my favourite on the same subject is a camel is a horse designed by committee. And if you wanted to design a horse and you had that vision, but you let 12 people in the room have their say, it wouldn't come out as you wanted it to do, and it wouldn't be as good. A vision is more perfect than committee, because everyone having their say, it becomes anodyne, it becomes compromised. Whereas the best things you can do is have an idea and have a vision and auteur that.
Rick, can I just say now, I can tell from his look that he's thinking, which committee designed the camel?
This is something that I shouldn't even have to prove, but gamers today still tie themselves into knots trying to take control of someone else's artwork.
I think Kojima needs someone to hold him back. If Kojima was able to do everything he wanted all the time, the MGS series would not be nearly as liked. I've heard that opinion a lot, and I like Kojima a lot. I really do, and I love his games, most of them. And there are some earlier games of his I would like to check out. But I actually think that is an interesting, and I agree with that sentiment about, limitation helps, and people saying no, or being honest, and giving you a little bit of pushback can lead to a better product.
What exactly does Vinny mean when he says that he wants the people working on Death Stranding to be honest with Kojima? How does he know that they weren't honest? Has he interviewed them with like a polygraph or something? But what if they were honest and they liked it? Would Vinny actually be satisfied with that? I'm guessing he wouldn't be. But then you realize it's not really about them then. Eventually what we're going to have to realize as a culture that all this bullshit where you project your own feelings onto other people to satisfy your stupid internet opinion says way less about your knowledge on the subject and more about just how selfish you must be to have this desire to control someone else's artwork.
Again, I like Kojima a lot. I really do, and I love his games, most of them.
This desire of Vinny's doesn't reflect any kind of insight into Hideo Kojima as an artist, because Vinny was only ever a fan of Kojima back when he couldn't properly achieve his goals. The other games, Metal Gear, they didn't count, and for the few ways that the Metal Gear games do count as Kojima games, you quite literally enjoy them for the wrong reasons, and you prove that by what you just said. Authority is not a bias, and it's not dogma. When you're discussing whether or not video games are art, or asking the question of how relevant information in a cutscene should be to a game's more involved parts, or its gameplay parts, for all of those kinds of questions, Eiji Aonuma, Hideo Kojima, Fumito Ueda, they're all important people to get the opinion of. Eiji Aonuma isn't just the originator for the story concepts in Zelda, he's also a level designer, or dungeon designer. Not only is Fumito Ueda the originator for all the story concepts in the Ico series, he's also an enemy designer. Aonuma's Zelda games, especially, were a direct result of attempting to answer questions like that, and I can't really summarize that in a single sentence because it's his life's work. If you're asking really any question, and you deliberately ignore someone who we know for a fact has answers, even if they're not the answers that you maybe wanted or agree with, I mean, yeah, you might be a contrarian. And that's what this comes down to. I spent a long time trying to tiptoe around because I still have a certain level of respect for Vinny, and I want to leave it up to him to improve these things because, unlike a lot of people, I don't think he owes me anything. I just think he owes it to himself to care about something he's spent, no exaggeration, his entire life on. But if I only did that for my own admiration of Vinny, I realize it would get in the way of the topic at hand. So as a compromise, I've condensed my points into an itemized list instead. Point number 1. Vinny, are you sure that 50 hours is really an unreasonable amount of time? Because first of all the story-driven or RPG-esque games that you do give your attention to are games that you yourself admit to having played for years.
It's kind of like whatever I'm in the mood for, honestly. Like, I'm not sure what I'm going to want to play when I'm done with these games. But when I was younger, and I had, like, you know, a collection of, like, I don't know, 15 games or 20 games. I mean, total. I would revisit whichever one I just felt like playing at the time. And I kind of do the same thing with streaming. I don't feel obligated to play any one specific thing. If I did, I'd be playing like Deltarune, because I'm sure that would get a lot of views, but it's just not something I want to do.
Does it not follow that the time sink is actually required, thus explaining why you prefer your childhood games to newer games? Or heck, why we all prefer our childhood games, because we don't explore past being a kid. Realistically speaking, when we were kids, we were more open to new experiences. That's what made us appreciate games better. If you can't find it in yourself to appreciate games now, that's a personal failing. It has nothing to do with trends or the industry. And how can you say that 50 hours is an unreasonable amount of time when your Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom streams look like this? Which brings me to point number 2. Vinny, have you actually metabolized the fact that you are addicted to video games? I know. Studies show that video games aren't actually harmful. However, you should know that addiction is a behavioral issue. So even if what you're doing has chemical dependencies, it's still the fault of the user for seeking those habits in the first place. Like, yeah, you can use seltzer to get off of cigarettes, but ideally your life should be fulfilling enough to where you wouldn't need to fill a hole anyway. Which brings me to point number 3. Vinny, are you aware of the context regarding this quote you used from Norm Macdonald? Because it goes against how you tried to use it. Now you might be wondering, okay, isn't this a little too personal and confrontational? My answer to that is absolutely the fuck not. The entire point of everything I've been saying is that video games are capable of being narrative art, and that Zelda games that Aonuma directed are in fact an example of narrative art. The entire reason that human beings tell each other stories is because we want to pass on deep emotional truths to confront our demons. The point is to take these morals to heart and apply them to your adult life. And apparently, Vinny and a lot of other gamers just think that that's pretentious. They don't just think that the moral lessons in fiction are tacky. What they won't admit is that they're terrified of the confrontation required for this.
How long until next Chrono Trigger playthrough? When's the next election? Apparently I play it every 4 years now. It's like the game that I know I will return to.
But I also have a lot of other RPGs. The reason Chrono Trigger is so easy to return to is I know it so well. I can pace out the streams nicely, and it's just a fun time for me. But the other reason Chrono Trigger is such an easy revisit is because it's an RPG that has, I've talked about this a million times, and I'm sorry if I'm boring you, but the pacing of the game is really good. Only 20 hours for a JRPG, which is nothing. And the music, it's like, oh, here's this amazing music. An hour later, here's this other amazing music. And it really helps carry the stream and the experience.
It's true, though. It's weird. I've been playing it, like, pretty much exactly... Maybe just to escape from the bad and just enjoy. You know what I mean? Just to, like, feel some, I don't know, some semblance of normalcy. Because, I mean, even if, whatever side of the fence you're on, it becomes a fucking circus, and it just becomes exhausting and negative and horrible. So, you know, enemies become friends, friends become enemies, and all that. You know what I mean, Brian?
In other words, they don't want to solve their emotional problems. They just want to goof off and have fun. Their primary goal is to escape into fiction, into a fake world that doesn't have all their problems in it. And gee, I wonder why someone would voluntarily engage in something explicitly meant as a distraction. What could they be distracting themselves from? I wonder.
People ceased to travel and stopped meeting in person. They grew distant from one another and became further isolated. The social, cultural, and political bonds between humans began to crumble.
No, Chad, that's not a metaphor.
If you're not a hedonist, you probably get bored of repeating the same jive nonsense for 10 years straight. Art is advice. Art is cognitive dissonance. Art is introspection. I mean, what the hell else is there in this world if you aren't interested in concepts like love or being a good person? Bottom line is that when Hyrule Historia came out, the English version got delayed. In reaction to this, the community worked together to try to translate it. Vinny was eager to learn about all of these things, and it was something that he expressed a genuine interest in. I know that Vinny and everyone else is capable of doing this. We may have forgotten it somewhere along the way, but it is not gone forever. And if we actually take the challenge, and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in an experience again, it's not just possible that the world around us will improve, it's causally guaranteed. But the first step to fixing a problem is accepting that you have one in the first place. So, that's all I can say.